Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International.
And I'm CJ here. Welcome to the program. Now on tonight's headlines.
Chaos at the Capitol. A mob supporting President Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol, breaking windows, pushing through police with shots fired inside as lawmakers gathered to count the votes, confirming President-elect Joe Biden won the election.
Japan's government declared a month-long coronavirus state of emergency in the greater Tokyo area on Thursday as the capital reported another record surge in daily infections.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo threatened sanctions against individuals and organizations involved in the arrest of dozens of Hong Kong democracy figures, voicing anger that an American was among those rounded up.
And losing a leg did not stop Gui Yuna from achieving her dreams. The 35-year-old former Paralympian has now chosen to take on competitive bodybuilding and has gone viral on Chinese social media for her positive attitude and inspiring story.
The United States today has witnessed a grave breach of democratic traditions. For the first time in American history, supporters of a losing presidential candidate forcibly disrupted the official counting of electoral votes. Take a look. Now, chaos erupted at the Capitol today when pro-Trump demonstrators breached barricade and pushed their way inside as lawmakers were in the process of making President-elect Biden's election official. Protesters scuffled with police. The Capitol was put on lockdown while law enforcement tried to regain control. Tear gas was fired outside the building to disperse the crowd, and both chambers, as you can see here, were empty. Vice President Mike Pence was rushed to safety. The Vice President later tweeted that the violence and destruction taking place at the U.S. Capitol must stop and must stop now. An extraordinary sight inside the House of Chamber, police drawing their guns while protesters were trying to force their way inside. Security forces fired tear gas in a 4-hour operation. Just to clear the Capitol, police said that one woman, reportedly a female Trump partisan from Southern California, was shot and killed, and that 3 other people died in the area in circumstances that were still unclear. Mr. Joe Biden called the violence an insurrection and demanded that President Trump immediately go on national television to tell the rioters to stand down. President Trump soon afterward released a video in which he called on the mob to leave.
Sacred of American under. Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward. So, President Trump, step up. About my safety, security, or the inauguration, I am not concerned. The American people are going to stand up. Stand up now. Enough is enough is enough.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us, from me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
Now, the woman who died on Wednesday of a bullet wound during the violent storming of the U.S. Capitol was shot by police, according to authorities. And the woman reportedly is a dedicated Donald Trump backer and an Air Force veteran who was among a throng of supporters of the president that invaded the U.S. legislature. Washington Police Chief Robert Conti said 52 people had been arrested on Wednesday, 26 of them on the grounds of the Capitol for curfew violations, unlawful entry, and weapons charges. 14 people were injured, one seriously after he was pulled into a crowd and assaulted. He also said that 2 pipe bombs had been discovered near the Capitol, one at the Democratic Party offices and the other at the Republican Party offices. In addition, a vehicle was discovered parked on Capitol grounds with a long gun and Molotov cocktails inside. Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser announced an extension of the city's state of emergency for 15 days through the January 20 presidential inauguration of Mr. Joe Biden, amid fears Trump and his supporters will continue to threaten violence.
A number of senators who said they had intended to support the objection reversed course following the violence, including Kelly Loeffler, who just Tuesday lost her special election in Georgia in a runoff that led to Democrats gaining control of the chamber. Watch this.
Too many Americans are frustrated at what they see as an unfair system. Nevertheless, there is no excuse for the events that took place in these chambers today, and I pray that America never suffers such a dark day again. Violence, the lawlessness, and siege of the halls of Congress are abhorrent and stand as a direct attack on the very institution my objection was intended to protect, the sanctity of the American democratic process.
Today was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol. But thanks to the swift efforts of U.S. Capitol Police, federal, state, and local law enforcement, we grieve the loss of life in these hallowed halls, as well as the injuries suffered by those who defended our Capitol today.
Trump and I, we've had a hell of a journey. I hate it being this way. Oh my God, I hate it. From my point of view, he's been a consequential president. But today, first thing you'll see. All I can say is count me out. Enough is enough. I've tried to be helpful.
The United States and the United States Congress have faced down much greater threats than the unhinged crowd we saw today. We've never been deterred before, and will be not deterred today. They tried to disrupt our democracy. They failed.
This will be a stain on our country, not so easily washed away. The final, terrible, indelible legacy of the 45th President of the United States, undoubtedly our worst. Those who perform these reprehensible acts cannot be called protesters. No, these were rioters and insurrectionists, goons and thugs, domestic terrorists. This mob was in good part President Trump's doing, incited by his words, his lies. This violence, in good part, his responsibility, his everlasting shame. Today's events certainly would not have happened without him.
One by one, officials around the globe responded with the sort of statements previously issued by the United States State Department when political violence consumed other countries. Prime Minister Scott Morrison of Australia condemned the violence, calling what unfolded inside Congress very distressing. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand on Twitter said she and her countrymen were devastated by the events, but expressed confidence that democracy would ultimately prevail. The right of the people, she said, to exercise a vote, have their voice heard, and then have that decision upheld peacefully should never be undone by a mob. German Chancellor Angela Merkel said she was furious and saddened by the storming of the U.S. Capitol by supporters of Donald Trump and said the president shared blame for the unrest. Matteo Salvini, the leader of the Nationalist League Party in Italy and a vocal admirer of President Trump, wrote on Twitter, "Violence is never the solution, ever," while Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India called for an orderly and peaceful transfer of power. The Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg, took the highly unusual step of weighing in on a domestic issue in a member state, writing, "The outcome of this democratic election must be respected."
Meanwhile, moments after the start of the joint session of Congress to certify Mr. Joe Biden's presidential victory, Congressman Paul Gosar stood to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona. Let's listen in.
Mr. Vice President, I, Paul Gosar from Arizona.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is. An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law, Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection.
The Constitution gives us here in Congress a limited role. We cannot simply declare ourselves a National Board of Elections on steroids. The voters, the courts, and the states have all spoken. They've all spoken. If we overrule them, it would damage our republic forever. This election actually was not unusually close.
The top Republican in Congress delivering a stinging rebuke to President Trump loyalists in his party who have objected to final certification of Mr. Joe Biden's presidential victory, warning such a move could prompt a death spiral for U.S. democracy. Congress reconvened nearly 6 hours later after leaving the floor, taking up where it had left off in hearing the objection from Senator Ted Cruz and Congressman Paul Gosar to Arizona's electoral results. The Senate rejected the objection 93-6 and the House rejected it 303-121. Since none of these objections have a majority, they had no chance of succeeding. Even if there was a majority on any of the objections, it would not change the outcome of the election. Mr. Biden will still be sworn in on January 20.
U.S. Congress formally certified Joe Biden as the next U.S. president on Thursday, dealing a hammer blow to Donald Trump, whose supporters stormed the Capitol hours earlier, triggering unprecedented scenes of mayhem in the seat of American democracy. Watch this.
The report we make is that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the president and the vice president according to the ballots that have been given to us.
He has a statement.
The president immediately released a statement pledging an orderly transition, but suggesting he would remain in frontline politics amid speculation that he may run again in 2024. He said, even though I totally disagree with the outcome of the election and the facts bear me out, nevertheless, there will be an orderly transition on January 20th. He also said, I have always said we would continue our fight to ensure that only legal votes were counted. While this represents the end of the greatest first term in presidential history, it's only the beginning of our fight to make America great again, according to the president. The certification came hours after a mob breached the U.S. Capitol and sent lawmakers scrambling for safety. They were able to return hours later, shaken but determined to complete the task.
Now, earlier, Twitter and Facebook suspended Donald Trump on Wednesday over posts accused of inflaming violence in the U.S. Capitol, as social media scrambled to respond to mayhem by supporters buying into his attacks on the integrity of the election. Take a look. The unprecedented sanctions came after the president took to social media to repeat his numerous claims about fraud and other impropriety in the election he lost to Joe Biden. This is an emergency situation, and we are taking appropriate emergency measures, including removing President Trump's video, according to Facebook Vice President of Integrity Guy Rosen. We removed it because, on balance, we believe it contributes to rather than diminishes the risk of ongoing violence. Facebook barred Trump from posting on the social network or its Instagram service for 24 hours, saying his messages were promoting violence. Before the violence, President Trump had told supporters on the National Mall in Washington that the election had been stolen. Hours later, as the violence mounted inside and outside the U.S. Capitol, he appeared on video and repeated the claim. He told protesters, quote, I love you, and described the people who stormed the Capitol complex as patriots. YouTube also said it removed the video because it violated policies on spreading election fraud.
Now, here in the Philippines, the Philippine National Police said there was no lapse on the part of the Makati City Police in its investigation on the death of flight attendant Christine Angelica Dacera. In a statement, it read, we will not fault the local police because they were just doing their job. In the desire to have their objective of solving the case is met with such efficiency, they just thought that was it. Since the prosecutors sent back the case for further investigation, that was simply it. Further investigate. That, according to PNP spokesperson Brigadier General Ildebrandi Osana, to the message he sent to reporters late Wednesday. This came after the Makati City Prosecutor's Office ordered the release of 3 arrested suspects and resolved that further investigation is needed to determine the circumstances behind Dacera's death. In addition to what he said earlier, he said, but at least they have started somewhere. Additional evidence is what the prosecutor needs. That's how the machinery of the justice system works. That, according to the spokesperson of the PNP. He added that police investigators assigned to the case will just continue their work to attain justice for Dacera. He said our investigators will just continue their work on the case in just a normal fashion. The challenge to ferret out the truth and serve the ends of justice is everyone's objective. In a 3-page resolution, the investigating prosecutor also directed the police officers to submit additional evidence, such as the DNA analysis report, toxicology, chemical analysis, and the histopath examination report. The hearing for the preliminary investigation of the case was set for January 13. Based on initial reports, Dacera and the suspects celebrated New Year's Eve at the City Garden Grand Hotel in Makati City. Dacera was found unconscious inside her hotel room on New Year's Day and was rushed to the hospital where she was declared dead on arrival.
Meanwhile, in Malacanang, the spokesperson, Secretary Harry Roque, said that President Duterte assures justice for the family of Christine Dacera following her controversial death. The Press Secretary Roque said the president will not let criminals get away without being punished. Let's listen in.
Well, unang-una po, ang pangako naman po ng presidente ay magkakamit po ang katarungan sa pamilyang Dacera. Malalaman po natin ang katotohanan. At sa administrasyon po ni Presidente, dahil siya ay abogado at dati pang piskal, hindi niya hahayaan na mga kriminal ay hindi po mapaparusahan. Kung maalala nyo nga po, napakatagal ng kaso kung Maguindanao Massacre. Kinailangan maging presidente si Presidente Duterte bago natapos yung kasong yan. At ganyan din po ang pangako ni Presidente sa pamilyang Dacera. Pero hindi po tayo ngayon po pwedeng magsalita dahil meron pa pong ongoing investigation. No? At kaugnay nitong investigation nito, hindi lang po PNP mag-iimbestiga, pati ang National Bureau of Investigation po ngayon ay mag-iimbestiga na. Huwag po kayong mag-alala kung yung piskal ay nagdesisyon na kinakailangan magkaroon ng regular na preliminary investigation. Yan po ay makakabuti dahil ang gusto ng piskal ay magkaroon ng additional ng ebidensya ng saggayon kapag naisampa sa kaso, dire-diretso na po sa Muntinlupa ang mga magiging akusado. So yung ginawa po ng piskal, sang-ayon po yan sa ating Rules of Criminal Procedure, sang-ayon po yan sa rules ng ating piskalya, at ang layon po ito ay para makonvict beyond reasonable doubt yung mga suspect sa karumal-dumal na pagpatay na ito.
Now, this also came as initial autopsy findings showed that the victim died of ruptured aortic aneurysm, which the victim's family rejected, prompting them to seek another autopsy. On Wednesday night, the Makati City Prosecutor's Office ordered the release of 3 arrested suspects and said further investigation is now needed. Police officers were also ordered to submit a DNA analysis report, toxicology chemical analysis, and a histopathology examination report as additional pieces of evidence. The hearing for the preliminary investigation of the case was set for January 13.
In other news, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo on Thursday threatened sanctions against individuals and organizations involved in the arrest of dozens of Hong Kong democracy figures, voicing anger that an American was among those rounded up. Pompeo said the 53 people arrested Wednesday should be released immediately and unconditionally. He said the United States will consider sanctions and other restrictions on any and all individuals and entities involved in executing this assault on the Hong Kong people. Pompeo, who remains in office for 2 weeks, said the United States would also explore restrictions against the financial hub's trade representative office in Washington. In an operation involving 1,000 officers, Hong Kong police arrested the activists for subversion in an escalation of Beijing's imposition of a tough security law in the wake of huge and sometimes violent democracy protests in 2019. Pompeo, a vehement critic of Beijing, said he was appalled by the arrest of John Clancy, a lawyer working for a firm known to take up human rights cases. He said, quote, "The United States will not tolerate the arbitrary detention or harassment of U.S. citizens." Hua Chunying, spokeswoman for China's foreign ministry, said Pompeo's statement was in serious violation of the norms governing international relations and urged the Secretary of State to stop interfering in China's internal affairs. Watch this.
一段时间以来，特朗普政府内少数反华政客不断地上演最后疯狂，不择手段利用所剩任期蓄意破坏中美关系，服务其个人政治私利。这种伎俩逆历史潮流而动，违背两国人民友好民意，必将遭到历史的惩罚。 我们敦促美方立即停止干涉中国内政、损害中方利益、破坏中美关系的言行。中方将采取一切必要措施，坚决维护自身主权、安全利益。美方必将为其错误行为付出沉重代价。
Pompeo also announced that Kelly Craft, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, would soon travel to Taiwan, calling the island a reliable partner and vibrant democracy that has flourished despite CCP or Chinese Communist Party efforts to undermine its great success. Taiwan shows what a free China could achieve, he added. The outgoing Trump administration has sent a bevy of high-level diplomatic delegations to Taiwan in the last year as it clashes with China on trade, security, and human rights. No date was given for Kraft's upcoming visit.
Meanwhile, British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab said Britain will not look the other way while the rights and the autonomy of the people of Hong Kong are trashed after the arrest of more than 50 pro-democracy figures and accuses China of deceiving citizens in the city about the true purpose of its national security law. Let's listen in.
Well, at the roundup of 53 politicians, activists, there's a lawyer there as well, I think is further evidence that they're violating the freedoms and the autonomy of the people of Hong Kong as protected under the UK-China Joint Declaration and International Treaty. When China first imposed the national security legislation, they said it was to bring some stability to Hong Kong. What is clear from these actions is that actually it is designed to crush political dissent. We'll work with all of our international partners to ensure that China lives up to the international responsibilities, the international obligations that it's accepted and that you'd expect of a leading member of the international community. Well, we've already extended an offer and a pathway to citizenship to British national overseas citizens, those people living in Hong Kong at the time of the handover. We've suspended extradition to Hong Kong, we've extended the arms embargo to Hong Kong, and obviously working very closely with all of our international partners, we'll think about what further action needs to be taken. But the fact is, we will not look the other way when the rights and the autonomy of the people of Hong Kong are trashed, and that's what we've seen today.
Police in Hong Kong arrested the 53 people on charges of subversion in early morning raids in their largest operation since a draconian security law was imposed on the financial hub last year. The charges were sparked by an attempt by opposition groups last year to win a majority in the city's partially elected legislature. However, Mr. Raab said the police operation involving about 1,000 officers demonstrated that the Hong Kong and Chinese authorities deliberately misled the world about the true purpose of the security law. He said it is being used to crush dissent and opposing political views. Britain has spoken out repeatedly about the increasingly draconian clampdown in Hong Kong, angering Beijing by relaxing entry rules for Hong Kong holders of British national passports, a legacy of the final years of Britain's 156-year rule over the territory. And the news continues. Zero and Eagle News. We'll be right back.
This portion is brought to you by Canreef Corporation, your ventilation and air conditioning specialist. Services offered: supply and installation of elevators, escalators, air conditioners, ventilators, jet towel hand dryers, generators, access control system, factory automation and modernization. For more info, please contact Ami Kanke at 0915-263-7198 or 0998-900-3224.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Hello there. Imagine Dami got the virus, and she infected 2 more. And those 2 infected a lot more of people. And it goes on and on until it became an epidemic. But what if Dami stayed at home? Then those 2 wouldn't have contracted the virus. Then those people would have not been infected. This is not just your battle, it's everyone's, and you can be a huge help. Follow social distancing, or better yet, stay at home.
Welcome back to the news. The director of the World Health Organization's European branch says more needs to be done to deal with the alarming situation brought on by a recently discovered variant of the novel coronavirus during the organization's weekly briefing on the pandemic. Watch this.
This is an alarming situation, which means that for a short period of time, we need to do more than we have done, and to intensify the public health and social measures to be certain we can flatten the steep vertical line in some countries.
The WHO's European region comprises 53 countries and includes Russia, and several countries in Central Asia and 22 countries in the region have recorded cases of the new variant. According to the organization's estimates, the new strain could replace others across the region. Europe has been hard hit by the COVID pandemic with more than 27.6 million cases and 603,000 deaths, according to WHO's monitoring. WHO Europe also estimates that excess mortality in 2020 was 5 times that of 2019 and 3 times that of 2018.
Meanwhile, Japan's government declared a month-long coronavirus state of emergency in the greater Tokyo area as the capital recorded another record surge in daily infections. Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga described a great sense of crisis as he announced the measure, which begins Friday and is less strict than harsh lockdown seen elsewhere or even the country's first virus emergency last spring. Take a look.
年末年始から本日に至るまで感染者数は極めて高く、本日東京では2400人を上回るなど厳しい状況であり、大変な危機感を持っております。何としてもこれ以上の感染拡大を食い止め、感染を減少傾向に転じさせる、そのために今回の緊急事態宣言を決断いたしました。第一に、飲食店の20時までの時間短縮。第二に、テレワークによる出勤者数7割減。第三に、20時以降、不要不急の外出の自粛。第四に、スポーツ観戦、コンサートなどの入場制限であります。若い方々への感染がさらなる感染拡大につながっているという現実があります。どうか皆さんのご両親やご父母、ご家庭、友人など世代を超えて大切な命を守るためにご自身のことと捉えていただいて行動をお願いをしたい。このように思います。
The month-long declaration is not nationwide. It only affects 4 neighboring areas that account for much of the rise in Japan's caseload, namely Tokyo, Chiba, Kanagawa, and Saitama. The region, known as Greater Tokyo, is home to more than 36 million people and accounts for a third of Japan's GDP. Other parts of the country are not affected for now, although one other region has said It could seek to be included if cases there continue to rise. A state of emergency empowers governors in affected regions to call for restrictions on movement and commerce, but offers little in the way of enforcement. Governors can request people to stay inside and call for businesses that attract large numbers of people, like entertainment venues or department stores, to close their doors. But there are no punishments for those who defy the request, nor any other enforcement mechanisms. Japan's government is seeking to introduce legislation this month to allow fines for businesses that defy closure requests and provide incentives for those who comply. This time, restaurants and bars will be asked to stop serving alcohol by 7 p.m. and close an hour later, except for takeout and delivery. Other businesses from gyms to theme parks are also likely to be asked to shorten hours, and telework will be encouraged with the goal of reducing commuter traffic by 70%. Residents will be asked to avoid non-essential outings, especially in the evening. The strongest power accorded to governors is the ability to commandeer buildings or land for medical purposes, for example, requiring landowners to turn over property to build temporary medical facilities. Local education boards can also close schools, but officials say there are no plans to do so for now. And reports suggest the cap on spectators at major events will be revised down to 5,000 people or 50% capacity, whichever number is smaller.
Meanwhile, in neighboring China, authorities reported 63 new infections Thursday, the highest daily tally since July, as authorities tried to stamp out an outbreak in a city of 11 million near Beijing. The government in the city of Shijiazhuang in China's northern Hebei province has imposed school closures, cut travel links, and begun mass testing as cases spike. One district in the city has been sealed off, while major highways leading into the area have been closed and intercity bus travel halted. Experts see mass vaccinations as the best route back to normality, but the first rollouts have coincided with alarming spikes in deaths and caseloads across many parts of the world. The latest global numbers make for grim reading. On Wednesday, a record 15,769 COVID-19 deaths were recorded around the world in the space of 24 hours.
And the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine in Australia has been brought forward now to mid to late February. The government is aiming to have 4 million to receive the jab by March. Announcing the accelerated rollout on Thursday, the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, also indicated it would be up to the states and territories to decide whether the vaccine could be made compulsory for some groups, such as aged care workers. Let's listen in.
Anticipate optimistically that we would hope to start the vaccination with around 80,000 vaccinations a week. That's what we are targeting, and then seeing that build up over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and we hope by the end of March, I should say, to have reached some 4 million population. That is a target. That is what we are working to. This will include the necessity for state governments and territory governments to harmonise and ensure a national consistency in public health orders, which is the process by which any requirement to have a vaccine is made legal across Australia. Finally, vaccination is not a silver bullet. Once the vaccination starts, COVID-safe practices do not end. They continue. COVID-safe practices will be a 2021 lived experience. There is still a lot to be learned about these vaccines and how they impact. That is in terms of transmissibility and issues of that nature. And that's why COVID-safe behaviours and other arrangements will still be necessary over the course of this year.
Despite having been largely free of COVID-19, Australia is currently battling to bring a cluster of cases under control and hoping aggressive testing and contact tracing can help avoid full-scale lockdowns.
In other news, German pharmaceutical firms Bayer and CureVac said Thursday that they joined forces in the development and supply of CureVac's COVID-19 vaccine candidate. Under the agreement, CureVac will be able to tap Bayer's expertise and established infrastructure, a joint statement said. CureVac began the final phase 3 trials of its vaccine candidate in mid-December, involving more than 35,000 volunteers in Europe and Latin America. The companies expect the deal to facilitate the supply of hundreds of millions of doses of the vaccine around the world once approvals are granted, the firm said. Financial terms were not disclosed. The deal echoes that of fellow German vaccine developer BioNTech with U.S. giant Pfizer, whose jab became the first to be approved in the European Union.
To other news now, ducks are slaughtered in a poultry farm in India after an outbreak of the deadly avian influenza is found to have killed scores of birds across the country. Let's take a look.
Eagle News will be right back. Don't go away.
This portion is brought to you by Kubert, an expert in air conditioning and electromechanical. Also engaged in structural, electrical, fire protection, plumbing, and sanitary services. Kubert, your ultimate NEPs and air conditioning solutions.
Events happen around us all the time. In our community, in our country, around the world. Events that affect people, move communities, or simply inspire us. Interesting events that people need to know. In these interesting times, we continue to be a competent partner in delivering news about these events. Fast, accurate, balanced. Eagle News, because we live in interesting times.
It's time to sing!
It's time to eat!
Hindi nga, it's time to sing na nga.
Hindi, it's time to eat!
Kantahan nga ito kantahan to.
Kainan to!
O sige, ganito na lang. Para magkasundo tayo,
It's
singing time! It's singing time! Mula Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 8 hanggang alas 9 ng gabi. Dito lang sa Net 25. Kumanta, sumaya tayong lahat. Saya-saya.
Welcome back to the news. Most Asian markets rallied Thursday as election wins in Georgia handed the Democrats control of the U.S. Congress, paving the way for Joe Biden to push ahead with his legislative agenda. That includes another huge stimulus package. The news allowed investors to look past extraordinary events in Washington, where pro-Donald Trump protesters stormed the Capitol building and delayed the ratification of Biden's November victory. It took attention attention away from soaring coronavirus cases around the world that are forcing governments to impose fresh lockdowns, with traders optimistic that the rollout of vaccines, though slower than hoped, will eventually allow life to get back to normal. The Dow and S&P 500 both ended at new records on Wall Street, though the Nasdaq reversed earlier gains on worries about possible Democrat-led regulation of big tech firms. Asia followed suit with Tokyo, Sydney, Singapore, Taipei, Manila, Jakarta, Bangkok, and Wellington all up more than 1%, while Seoul added more than 2%. Shanghai added 0.7% and Mumbai gained 0.4%. Hong Kong was in the red after 6 days of gains, however, with market heavyweights Alibaba and Tencent diving following a report that the Trump administration is considering barring investment in their New York shares.
Meanwhile, U.S. private employment fell 123,000 in December, according to private data released on Wednesday, a worrying sign for the economy as the coronavirus pandemic worsens. It was the first decline since the early weeks of the COVID-19 outbreak, and payroll services firm ADP said most of the damage was in large firms with more than 1,000 employees, which shed 169,000 positions in the month. As the impact of the pandemic on the labor market intensifies, December posted the first decline since April last year, according to Ahu Yildirmaz, Vice President and co-head of the ADP Research Institute. The job losses were primarily concentrated in retail and leisure and hospitality. Services firms lost 105,000 jobs, including 58,000 in leisure and hospitality, while manufacturing dropped 21,000, according to the data. Businesses had been rehiring the millions of jobs cut when the pandemic hit in March and caused nationwide shutdowns. But the recovery has slowed in recent months as COVID-19 infections spiked, causing new business restrictions and as economic stimulus measures lapsed.
On to our NBA news now. The Brooklyn Nets snapped their two-game skid against the Utah Jazz with big games from Kyrie Irving, Caris LeVert, and Jarrett Allen. We have Teddy Sumage for the details. Tenny.
The Kevin Durant-less Brooklyn Nets snapped their two-game losing skid with a 130-96 win over the Utah Jazz Tuesday night. The Nets had a great game from Kyrie Irving, who finished with 29 points, Caris LeVert with 24 points off the bench, and Jarrett Allen outplayed All-Star Rudy Gobert with a double-double of 18 points and 19 rebounds.
It's really satisfying, especially because we played, so well in the defensive end, kind of where we've been struggling at. We feel like we can score with anybody in the league offensively. We knew that was a matter of time before that came back. But, defensively, we weren't on the same page. I feel like tonight we took a step in the right direction.
Just went out there and did it. I don't think we thought about the scheme too much. We still wanted to play our defensive way, but we went out there and played hard, we all had each other's backs. We all were ready to go.
We'll have more on the Nets and other NBA teams here on Eagle News International. In New York, Tenny Sumagi, Eagle News, we live in interesting times.
Thanks, Tenny. Losing a leg did not stop Ju Yuna from achieving her dreams. The 35-year-old former Paralympian has now chosen to take on competitive bodybuilding and has gone viral on Chinese social media for her positive attitude and inspiring story. Take a look.
茄子，然后就是三脚猫，会这么去称呼你。经常是语言上有些攻击，以后还有一些肢体上的一些，不好的东西。当时我心里就是觉得，当时我摔下来的时候，那时我哭了，第一次我哭了。后来慢慢我习惯，我觉得 都没关系，你们随便欺负我了，没关系。我觉得只要我内心强大，我觉得都没什么问题。反而我觉得
13号选手刘洋
Ju, who is from the southern city of Nanning, was raised by her mother because her father died before she was even born. And while many online commended her after her bodybuilding debut, where she dazzled in a traditional high-neck kipao dress and beat able-bodied rivals, there were a few dissenting voices telling her to stay at home. Occasionally, people on the street ask her what happened to her right leg, and she is taken aback. Missing a limb is so normal to her now that she no longer thinks about it. The odds were stacked against her, but her athleticism matched her determination, and in 2001, she became involved in Paralympic sports, going on to represent China at the 2004 Games, finishing 7th in her long jump category. She also did high jump and later archery, and also took part in the torch relay for the 2008 Beijing Summer Games and Paralympics.
还好没有那么紧张，又不是来生第一的，所以没有那么紧张。
Very inspiring.
I know, really impressive too. No excuses now.
That's right.
Well, you know, I'm really looking forward also to the Paralympics that we're
True.
supposed to host, right? Well, we have a lot of really good athletes as well. That's it for tonight's broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us. I am CJ Hero. Please join us again tomorrow.
All right, we'll see you back tomorrow. And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and
We live in interesting times.